It was supposed to be a quiet weekend at my late uncle's lake cabin. The kind of weekend where the loudest thing you hear is a dock rope tapping wood, and maybe your own bad thoughts catching up with you. Instead, by the end of that first week, I had a $750 fine zip-tied to my gate, a forged HOA notice with a dead man's signature on it, and a group of overdressed lunatics drinking wine in my house like they were touring a spa they already owned. You live long enough, you learn some people don't steal with crowbars. They steal with letterhead. I'd driven up to Hayden Lake after a brutal stretch of consulting work out in Arizona, the kind of burnout that makes even silence feel medicinal. By the time I got through the winding mountain roads and rolled up the old gate, dusk was settling in. The trees were black against the sky, and the whole place smelled like cedar and cold water. My uncle's cabin sat right where it always had, solid and simple, hand-cut logs, stone chimney, wrap-around porch, old swing hanging a little crooked like it remembered every summer we ever spent there. It had passed to me legally, clean and clear. No mortgage, no shared easement nonsense, no hidden claims, and best of all, no HOA. I had checked that more than once before probate even finished. So when I found that envelope strapped to the gate the next morning, I honestly thought it had to be a joke. Glossy paper, fancy logo, Crescent Ridge HOA. The language was pure bureaucratic perfume, the kind of writing that tries to sound official, so you won't notice it's insane. According to the notice, my property had been designated a quiet rest zone on Thursdays and was required to remain unoccupied during that time. There was a red stamp across the bottom, first violation, and a fine for $750. Signed by Karen Sharp, President, Crescent Ridge HOA. I stood there barefoot with a coffee mug in my hand, reading it over 3 times, waiting for it to turn into something that made sense. It never did. Across the lake, maybe a mile out as the crow flies, sat Crescent Ridge, a gated development full of modern houses, trimmed hedges, expensive decks, and a kind of fake calm that usually means somebody is suing somebody behind closed doors. Nice enough from a distance, I guess, if you like neighborhoods that look like they were printed from a template. But legally, geographically, practically, it had nothing to do with me. My parcel wasn't inside their boundary, wasn't attached to their jurisdiction, wasn't under any shared covenant. On paper, my place and theirs might as well have been on separate planets. I figured it was some clerical mix-up, so I handled it the professional way first. I emailed them copies of the deed, title records, boundary survey, all of it, and told them clearly that they had the wrong property and needed to stop contacting me. 2 days later, they emailed back. No apology, no correction, just a new PDF and more nonsense. This one claimed the HOA had entered some kind of temporary cooperative integration arrangement with county zoning that allowed limited authority over nearby parcels for sustainable recreational use. They referred to my cabin as a rotational leisure property for board restoration days. I remember sitting there staring at that screen, thinking these people really wrote themselves a fantasy where they get to assign weekdays to my house. Thursday, apparently, belonged to them. That was the point where it stopped being funny. I installed motion cameras, swapped the lock for a smart deadbolt, turned on the old security system, and spent half the week pissed off enough to taste metal. I still hope maybe they were bluffing. Maybe it was just paper intimidation from people who'd gotten too used to nobody pushing back. But Thursday morning, I parked my truck down the road, hiked it on foot, and watched the live camera feed from a little patch of trees with a thermos of coffee and a bad feeling in my gut. At 11:05, a dark blue SUV pulled up, for people got out. One of them was Karen Sharp. You can tell a certain kind of person before they even open their mouth. Karen had that look, neat blonde bob, navy blazer in perfectly normal weather, clipboard tucked under one arm like she was entering a courthouse instead of trespassing on private land. She walked to my gate, punched in the code I hadn't changed yet, and strolled right in with the others like they'd made a reservation. One guy carried a cooler. Another had a speaker. A woman started taking porch photos. Karen pulled a key out of her purse, opened my front door, and they all walked into my cabin. My cabin. For the next 6 hours, I watched them turn my uncle's place into some deranged little wellness retreat. Music playing, charcuterie on the table, wine poured into my glasses, yoga mats on my floor. Somebody lit the fireplace, even though the day was mild. They used a sauna, soaked in a hot tub, pulled a robe from my linen closet like they were paying guests. At one point, Karen stood by the window with a glass of Chardonnay and said, "Plain as day. This is exactly the kind of atmosphere we want for board wellness. He's not even here during the week. What's the harm?" Another voice said zoning hadn't passed yet. Karen said, "Close enough." That line sat in my head like a nail. Before they left, they hung a pastel flyer on my door that said Crescent Ridge HOA presents Thursday restoration retreats, Hayden Lakeside, Tranquility by Design. Private tours available next week. Tours. I went inside after they were gone, and I'm telling you, I have never felt rage that quiet before. The place smelled like lavender oil and toasted bread. The fireplace was still warm. There were wine glasses in the sink. My shower floor was wet. On the coffee table sat an old guest book my uncle used to keep out for family. Somebody had written, "Lovely Thursday. Thank you for sharing your space with the community." I didn't punch the wall, though I wanted to. I backed up every second of footage instead. Multiple drives, cloud copies, timestamps, screenshots, lock logs, network connections, all of it. Then I called the sheriff's office just to get something on record. The deputy was polite but cautious. Said it would be easier if there had been forced entry or damage. That was when I checked the lock system more closely and found out it had been remotely updated days earlier through the same service vendor used by Crescent Ridge. That one made me laugh, but not in a healthy way. By Monday, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused. There's a point where outrage burns off and leaves something colder behind, and that's where I was. I went to the county zoning office with my deed, my survey, the bogus notices, and a calm voice that probably scared people more than yelling would have. A zoning clerk named Douglas pulled the records. Sure enough, Crescent Ridge had filed a supplemental jurisdiction request a year before, trying to extend authority over 3 nearby parcels. Mine was one of them. The application included supposed owner consent, signed by my uncle. My uncle had been dead for 2 weeks when that signature was dated. The copy looked like a bad forgery from a home printer. No witness, no notary, shaky signature, wrong slant, wrong line pressure, wrong everything. My uncle printed clean and straight. This thing looked like somebody traced it while riding in the back of a truck. Doug got real uncomfortable when I pointed out the date. Back at the cabin, I pulled out old cards, old notes, anything in my uncle's handwriting, and compared them line by line. The fake didn't even deserve the word fake. It was lazy. But lazy fraud still works if the right people in the system are willing to let it. So I started digging harder. Open records, GIS overlays, zoning packets, metadata from scan files. That was where things got interesting. One skin tied to bogus consent form carried author info pointing back to a county workstation. Then a friend of mine, Val, a GIS analyst, helped me compare official parcel records against Crescent Ridge planning materials. That was when she found a marketing page. My cabin was on it. Big smiling banner image. My lake view, my porch, my house, dressed up with pastel graphics, and some ridiculous quote about peace and community. There was even a donation page connected to it, collecting money for residential renewal. I just sat there staring at it, feeling that weird, hollow kind of disgust that shows up when somebody has crossed so many lines they don't even look like lines anymore. They weren't just using my property. They were branding it, selling it, folding it into a fantasy where my house already belonged to them and the rest of the world just hadn't caught up yet. Then the smear campaign started. Work contacts sent me screenshots from local groups and neighborhood pages. People were posting cropped photos of my truck, my deck, my place, claiming I was running illegal rentals, maybe some shady retreat business, maybe worse. One fake account kept talking about shared environmental stewardship and cooperative living in the exact same language from the Crescent Ridge paperwork. A fake rental listing went up on a cheap travel site, calling my place Tranquility Lodge, complete with fake 5-star reviews about board-approved wine flights and the divine yoga deck. That was the moment I understood something ugly and useful. Karen wasn't after a weekend in my cabin. She was building a paper reality around it. And once enough people accept the paper version, the truth starts having to fight for oxygen. So I fought back where I knew how. I set up a live public stream of the cabin. No audio, just boring visuals, porch, dock, kitchen, living room, the most uneventful footage on earth. I built a plain little site and posted a sarcastic daily schedule. 7 a.m., make coffee. 9 a.m., organize screws by length. Noon, read and sigh at the lake. 6 p.m., cook a sad dinner. 9 p.m., not host an orgy. It got traction fast. People online can smell absurdity, like blood in water. Memes started. A local reporter called. I showed her the forged papers, the retreat flyer, the donation page, the footage. She ran the story. That's when the dam broke. Other property owners reached out. A widow named Lucinda sent me a nearly identical agreement, supposedly signed by her husband after he'd already died. A guy named Daniel sent video of HOA reps showing up with brochures offering enhanced community services if he opted into the extended plan. Same phrases, same methods, same pressure points. Seasonal homes, inherited homes, older owners, people living alone, people assumed to be too tired or too scattered to fight. Turns out I wasn't special. I was just early. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside was a USB drive with a note that said, "You're not crazy." I ran it on a sandbox machine because I still enjoy not destroying my own laptop. What was on it made my skin crawl. Internal HOA emails, drafts of forged forms, meeting minutes, notes about boundary drift, retroactive consent, estate in limbo. My favorite, if favor is the word, was an email about my property calling it ideal because it had eco-aesthetic, single owner, emotionally unattached. Karen told Doug to make sure the paper trail was ready before summer. Doug replied with a reminder that my uncle had died in May, so the signature should be dated earlier. That was the whole game. Right there, not a misunderstanding, not overreach, not a paperwork accident, a plan. I handed the package over to law enforcement, the paper, and anybody official who still had a pulse. The follow-up article came out with names, documents, comparisons, timelines, all of it. After that, everything moved fast. Search warrants, raids, file boxes carried out of the HOA office, county investigators tearing through zoning records, hard drives seized, donation funds traced into Karen's personal accounts, schedules labeling which outside properties were in Thursday rotation, notes describing owners as soft targets, widows, pressure cases, estates in limbo. It was uglier than I expected, and I already expected ugly. The hearing a few months later felt less like drama and more like rot finally being opened up to air. Karen came dressed like a woman who still thought presentation could save her. Doug looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 days. The prosecution laid it all out: trespassing, forgery, fraud, misuse of private property, false zoning certifications, unauthorized access, stolen funds. Lucinda testified with the kind of calm that makes a room shut up on instinct. Daniel handed over his footage. I walked through the notices, the forged signature, the fake listings, the video of them drinking in my house like they were paying members of a country club for narcissists. Karen's lawyer tried suggesting I had somehow benefited from the exposure. I said if that was true, they could cover the property tax increase they helped create. Even the room needed a second after that. Doug flipped before the end of the hearing and started cooperating. Karen held out until the financial records hit. Once the money trail showed donations landing in accounts tied back to her family, the whole thing sagged. You could see it in her face. Not remorse. Just a look of somebody realizing power works right up until it doesn't. In the end, Crescent Ridge dissolved. Assets got liquidated. Owners were compensated. Karen went to prison. Doug did too, and lost his government career for good. I got enough money out of the mess to rebuild security properly, improve the dock, and finish some things my uncle used to talk about doing someday. The weird part is, justice doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like finally locking a door that should have never been open in the first place. Sometimes it's just a quiet after a long stretch of violation. It took time for the cabin to feel like mine again. For a while, every sound at the gate made my shoulders tense. But that faded. Pines, water, real friends, honest laughter. Those things do their work slowly. The next spring, on a Thursday, I invited a few people over. Lucinda brought pie. Daniel grilled trout. Somebody played bluegrass low enough not to ruin the lake. Above the porch, I hung a wooden sign I carved myself. Thursdays by invitation only. Everybody laughed when they saw it. Later that night, after the fire burned low and the last car lights disappeared down the road, I took a beer down to the dock and sat there watching moonlight move across the water. Behind me, the cabin stood quiet, still, safe, and mine in a way that felt deeper now because someone had tried so hard to take it. That whole mess taught me something I wish I'd learned in a less insane way. Some people don't start with greed. They start with entitlement, and after a while they can't even tell the difference. They convince themselves access is ownership. Pressure is permission. Paperwork is truth. But truth has a nasty habit of surviving long enough to embarrass people. And Karen finally learned what Thursday was actually reserved for. Consequences. So let me ask you this. When somebody hides stuff behind rules, titles, and polished language, is that any less dirty than kicking a door? And if you've ever dealt with people who thought power gave them the right to take what wasn't theirs, tell me how it ended. Because I know I'm not the only one who's had to teach that lesson the hard way.